welcome to Listening Librarians. Katie and I are here today to talk about some spooky stories that we've been listening to on audiobooks. So Katie, what's your first recommendation?
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to start with my spookiest one. And this one is definitely for fans of slasher movies.
Oh boy.
And that is The Final Girl Support Group. It's by Grady Hendrix.
Okay.
I have, at this point, listened or read all of his books. And I have never read another author like him. So the only thing you can do to describe him is campy horror. So some of his other titles kind of indicate the campiness. My Best Friend's Exorcism, the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. Mm-hmm. So even though it's kind of silly in some parts, there's definitely horror, or at least gore involved, and this one was no different. So this one centers around that trope of the final girl. So think Jamie Lee Curtis character in Halloween, or the character of Sally in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They're the final girl standing after like all their friends and family members are dead, and they're the one going after that serial killer, murderer, whatever it might be, psychopath, and then they're going to win. So that's kind of like an iconic trope, especially in older slasher movies. Mm-hmm. And so this is actually about a group of final girls. They have their own support group where they meet monthly with a therapist to kind of get their lives back on track. Now, our main character that the novel follows is Lynette Tarkington. And it's been 22 years since she was a final girl in a massacre that occurred. And so the support group is coming together, and it kind of seems like everyone wants to maybe move on because this has taken up so much of their life. Mm-hmm. Lynette is not ready to let go. And then one of the members goes missing, and she goes, something's happening, and it turns out she's right. So now one by one these final girls are being picked off, and so will there be like a final girl, or are they going to, they've been together for years in this support group, are they going to be able to work together and defeat this like bad guy who's after them? So it was fun, and it was definitely, it had its moments of gore and the macabre, but not terrifying. So a good like kind of in between scary story. Now it is narrated by Adrienne King. She has not done too much, but I thought she did a very good job. And it's about 14 hours, but it does not feel like it's 14 hours. So yeah, I enjoyed it.
Well, that's good to know, because I'm not someone who really can deal with a whole lot of horror.
Okay.
But that sounds like that could be about my speed. So my first one, it's kind of classed under sci-fi fantasy, at least here in the library, but it's a little bit dystopian, and there's a lot talking to the dead. I guess that's going to be my part of the theme today, is the talking to the dead. Okay. We'll get to that. But the first book I have is The Library of the Dead by T.L. Huchu. It's the first book in the Edinburgh Nights duology. And it features Ropa, who is a teen dropout, but also a licensed ghost talker. So she's able to get messages from the dead to carry them to the people who are living, the dead want to contact. And she does this as a job to support her grandmother and her little sister. Now, at the beginning of the book, the dead tell her that someone is turning children into these like little zombies, empty husks.
Not good.
And they're kind of prematurely old looking. And it's just something really weird is going on. They don't know what's happening, but they want her to check it out because this affects their community as much as it does the living community. It's wild. I can't even begin to tell you more than that, because I was trying to wrap my head around so much of what was going on. But what really got me about the book is it's set in Edinburgh, Scotland, which I love.
And is considered a very ghosty town.
Very ghosty town already because they've got the old part of Edinburgh has all these old closes and it's just like layers and layers and layers. You've got your big tall buildings of all these apartments, the tenements, but there's also layers below that. And so this is set kind of in underground Edinburgh, and technically this Library of the Dead is a place that's under the old Calton burial ground, which I've been to.
Oh,
and
cool.
Yeah, it's just one of these old cemeteries where it's grave upon grave upon grave and lots of old, really interesting sculptures on the gravestone. So it was just fun to feel myself back in that space again and then go deep into something mysterious. So you're kind of getting a mix of fantasy and mystery and some horror in it, but manageable horror. It's not bloody slasher, anything like that. The audiobook is about 8 hours, and it's narrated by, and I'm hoping my handwriting got the name right, Tinashe Warakandwa. I hope I wrote it down right. But very entertaining. There is a second book that came out this year. I think it's Our Lady of Mysterious Ailments.
Great name.
I have not picked it up yet, but I have a feeling at some point I will because it was a really interesting tale and very different from some things I've read before.
Nice. So it's funny that your book started with the library because my next book is also about a library. This is the Library of the Unwritten.
Oh,
which
love
is
that one.
By A.J. Hackwith.
Yeah.
So I picked this because there are a lot of people who, you want to get into the Halloween spirit and maybe read something spooky, but this is like not actually spooky. It just takes place in a spooky place. So this is about Claire. She is our head librarian for the Unwritten Wing, which is part of Hell's Library. Yeah. And so the Unwritten Wing, which is kind of hard to say without stuttering, is where all of the unpublished and unfinished stories go, which would actually probably be somewhat scary to authors who are being haunted by, unfinished characters maybe. But part of Claire's job, in addition to normal library stuff, is recapturing characters that have escaped their novels. And so this novel, of course, centers around when one of those characters escapes. His name is, they just call him Hero. And so he has escaped. They think it's going to be a run-of-the-mill, let's go get Hero. But things kind of go sideways when this angel named Ramiel shows up and stops Claire and her assistant, who's one of the muses named Brevity, and insists that she has the Devil's Bible. And the Devil's Bible could be used to essentially upend both heaven and hell. So Ramiel very much wants to get this back. And so now Claire, our librarian, and this anxiety-ridden demon named Leto, and then Hero, as well as that muse Brevity, all have to kind of get together, and they're going to go solve this mystery of where's the Devil's Bible so they can get Ramiel off their back and just get everything back to normal in the Unwritten Wing of Hell's Library. So this one was narrated by Lisa Flanagan. She has done a bunch of audiobooks, so I knew right away it was going to be good. It is also 14 hours, but didn't feel it. And I like my note. I said, feels very British. So if you like that kind of humor or that cheek almost, it was a good time.
Well, I'll have to try and listen to that on audio sometime because I've read the book a couple of times. We actually discussed it in the Fantasy Fiction Book Club.
Oh, nice.
Last year. And there are 2 other books in the series, but one of the scenes I loved the most about that book was the duel in Valhalla.
Yes.
That was great.
They go all over. Yeah. It was wonderful.
Yeah. So excellent choice.
Well, what else did you read?
Well, the other one I had is something of a recent tradition for me, in that in October, I usually like to listen to a Neil Gaiman audiobook, because Neil Gaiman does weirdly, little bit creepy, little bit spooky, not usually over the top spooky, but just enough to
That
twist.
borderline.
Yeah, just enough to twist your mind a little bit. And one of my favorites of his is actually a children's book called The Graveyard Book.
Excellent book.
Yes. And it originally came out in 2008, so it's not super old. But there are two different audio versions of it. One is narrated by the author, and Neil does an excellent job narrating his own books. He really gets into the characters. It's very entertaining. But this time around, I actually listened to the full cast version.
Oh.
And it's still unabridged.
Okay.
So you have a narrator, which is Derek Jacobi.
Okay.
So very proper English voice. And then you've got a bunch of other characters played by a number of other British actors and actresses. The story is, it almost reads like a bunch of short stories pieced together. It starts off with an infant toddler boy who is the only survivor of his entire family being murdered. And the reason he's a survivor is he managed to get himself out of the crib and la-di-da-di-da down the stairs and out the door and made it to a locked graveyard before the murderer could get him. And when he gets to the graveyard, the ghosts of the people buried there are able to see him and welcome him. He obviously can see them. You know, he can't talk at that age, but there's enough interaction that the ghosts kind of adopt him. Mr. and Mrs. Owens adopt him and give him the name Nobody.
Yes.
Or Bod.
Mm-hmm.
So he's basically raised there throughout his childhood. And he not only has his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Owens, but he also has a guardian named Silas. And Silas is kind of a shadowy figure because he's not a ghost, but we don't really get the sensation that he's altogether human.
Yeah.
And I think the implication is that he's a vampire or something by the end of the book. But he can go out of the graveyard and get the food that nobody needs to, grow, thrive, all of that. And throughout the book, then, as Bod grows, he makes friends, and one is a little girl named Scarlet. One is a ghost named Liza. And it's just a delightful story. It won a Newbery Medal. It won the Hugo Award. The audiobooks have gotten 2 Audis. So,
wow.
I mean, it's really a modern classic. It's excellent. And even though it's for kids, adults really are going to appreciate it. And what I also liked about the audiobook is in between chapters, you get this little musical interlude. It's a version of the classical piece Danse Macabre, which if you heard it, you would recognize it. I don't remember the composer, but it's played by Bella Fleck, who's a highly renowned folk musician. So it's just got everything. It's got music, it's got great writing, it's got great acting, and
I listened
so much fun.
to the Neil Gaiman audiobook. I have not listened to the full cast audio. I mean, a full cast audiobook is typically always excellent because, they know it's a good book, so they'll bring in all the people. I will have to try out the full cast now.
Well, and what I especially enjoyed about that, once I could tune in my ear to the different voices, the man Jack, who is the murderer, is actually voiced by Andrew Scott, who
does a good creepy voice.
He doesn't. And also it's not just it's creepy, but it's every now and then it's that very civilized sort of voice, but then it's got that creepy edge to it.
Yes.
He played Moriarty in
Sherlock.
the BBC Sherlock.
Yeah.
He played the priest in Fleabag, so you've probably seen him on screen. and you can get that voice in your head thinking about the
Yes.
audio. So highly, highly recommended.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, next month is November, and we're, kind of getting into the Thanksgiving groove of being relaxed and just hanging out. So we're going to do some comfort reads.
Yeah.
And so that'll be fun. You'll get to hear about, just like what makes us happy and what's an easy read. And yeah, so thank you for joining us for today's Listening Librarians.
And we'll be happy to see you again for next month, and get ready for cozy season.
Bye-bye.
See ya.